We begin our show today with New York Times reporter David Barstow. He recently won the 2009 Pulitzer Prize for investigative reporting for exposing how dozens of retired generals working as radio and television analysts had been co-opted by the Pentagon to make its case for the war in Iraq, and how many of them also had undisclosed ties to military contractors that benefited from policies they defended. Barstow uncovered Pentagon documents that repeatedly refer to the military analysts as message force multipliers, or surrogates, who could be counted on to deliver administration themes and messages to millions of Americans in the form of their own opinions. The so-called analysts were given hundreds of classified Pentagon briefings, provided with Pentagon-approved talking points, and given free trips to Iraq and other sites paid for by the Pentagon. David Barstow wrote, quote, "Records and interviews show how the Bush administration has used its control over access and information in an effort to transform the analysts into a kind of media Trojan horse, an instrument intended to shape terrorism coverage from inside the major TV and radio networks. The officials appeared on all the main cable news channels, Fox News, CNN, and MSNBC, as well as the 3 nightly network news broadcasts. The Pentagon program started during the buildup to the Iraq War."
You met with Secretary of Defense Rumsfeld.
Special briefing on Thursday. Very interesting. A lot of good information, especially about post-Saddam, post-regime time. What are we going to do then? It's a very well laid out plan.
The Pentagon continued to use retired generals to counter criticism on various issues, ranging from Guantanamo to the surge in Iraq. In some cases, analysts would appear on cable news programs live from the Pentagon just minutes after receiving a special briefing.
And this is just coming into CNN right now. The Defense Secretary Donald Rumsfeld has just wrapped up his meeting with retired U.S. generals. Our own military analyst, retired U.S. Air Force Major General Don Shepard, is fresh out of that meeting. He's joining us now live from the Pentagon.
The message needs to be, imagine an Iraq. Imagine Iraq under the control of Zarqawi with another conveyor belt for tourists combined with oil and water and land and resources. Imagine the effect of that. That's the message that has to get out to the American people.
Since the New York Times' first report appeared 13 months ago, the major cable news programs and television networks have responded with what has been described as a, quote, deafening silence. Even after David Barstow won the Pulitzer Prize last week, the story and even Barstow's prize went unnoticed on cable news and television networks. Up until this week, the Pentagon defended its actions. In January, the Pentagon's Inspector General dismissed allegations the program violated laws barring propaganda and rejected reports showing the analysts used their Pentagon access to win government contracts for defense companies. However, on Tuesday, the Pentagon took the unusual step of admitting that the report was flawed and withdrew it. Well, David Barstow joins us right now in our Firehouse studio. Investigative reporter at the New York Times, the 2009 Pulitzer Prize winner for investigative reporting. This is his first national broadcast TV interview, and we welcome you to Democracy Now!
Thank you.
So let's begin by talking about, first of all, congratulations on your award. Let's begin by talking about this report that has been retracted by the Pentagon. Explain exactly what it said and where it was and how it was retracted.
Well, on January 14th of this year, as you pointed out, the Inspector General came out with this long-awaited report that was essentially a group of members of Congress, after the stories ran, asked for the Inspector General to take a look at this program that I wrote about and look at a couple of key questions. One was, did it violate long-standing laws that we have that forbid the Pentagon from targeting the American public with propaganda? And another was this question of whether or not the special access that was granted to the military analysts who participated in this program, whether that access was used to help them in the competition for contracts related to the wars in Iraq and Afghanistan. So the report comes out in January, and it effectively exonerated the program. Now, one thing your viewers should know is that as soon as the stories ran, the program itself was suspended by the Pentagon, pending the outcome of this investigation. But what happened earlier this week was really unusual. It really is very rare for the Inspector General of the Defense Department to rescind and repudiate, and in fact, even withdraw the report from its own website And the reason why they did is because after the report was released, it became pretty clear that there were significant problems with it, significant factual problems with it. The one that jumped out to me immediately as I read through the report for the first time was that it listed one particular general who I'd written an awful lot about, General Barry McCaffrey, who's probably the preeminent military analyst for NBC and MSNBC. It listed him as having absolutely no ties to any defense contractors. Well, I had written 5,000 words that detailed tie after tie after tie he had to defense contractors, either as someone who sat on the boards of publicly traded companies, as a consultant to many defense contractors, and as an advisor to a private equity firm in New York that invests heavily in the biggest defense contractors in Iraq and Afghanistan. And so it became pretty clear that there was something wrong with this report. What we've learned in the last few days is that a couple of different independent inquiries happened inside the Inspector General's office in the wake of that report, in the wake of concerns that were being raised by members of Congress and others that there was something wrong with this report. And as they dug deeper and deeper and deeper into it, they just found more and more factual errors, flaws in methodology. We learned that people who did the initial report didn't even bother apparently to read all of the emails that we had pried loose over the course of a 2-year Freedom of Information Act battle with the Defense Department. So ultimately, they came very reluctantly to the conclusion that the only thing that they could do was simply to rescind the entire report. We'll see where it goes from here. There are some members of Congress who are saying, we need to know more about why that Inspector General's report went so far off the track.
And who exactly did the Inspector General's report?
Well, they had a unit within the Inspector General's office that focuses on policy. And one of the interesting aspects that came out, or has come out in the last couple of days, is that normally the Inspector General's office follows a pretty rigid series of rules in terms of how it's supposed to do its investigations. And what the internal inquiries of the Inspector General's office discovered is that many of their own internal policies and rules that are supposed to provide a level of quality control over their work product were in fact not followed in this case.
I think what's so interesting about this story is not only what the Pentagon has done, it's the lack of reporting on this by the networks. Of course, that is your subject here, how the networks use them. How many times have you been invited on the networks? You just won the Pulitzer Prize for this investigation to explain the story of the network's use of these pundits.
To be honest with you, I haven't received many invitations, in fact, any invitations to appear in any of the main network or cable programs. I can't say I'm hugely shocked by that. On the other hand, while there's been kind of deafening silence, as you put it, on the network side of this, the stories have had and it sparked an enormous debate in the blogosphere, and to this day, I continue to get regular phone calls from not just in this country but around the world, where other democracies are confronting similar kinds of issues about the control of their media and the influence of their media by the government. So it's been an interesting experience to see the sort of two reactions. One being silence from the networks and the cable programs, and the other being this really lively debate in the blogosphere.
Well, we're going to talk all about the program in a minute. David Barstow, investigative reporter for the New York Times, has just won the 2009 Pulitzer Prize for his articles, Message Machine Behind TV Analysts, Pentagon's Hidden Hand, and One Man's Military-Industrial Media Complex. This is Democracy Now! Back in a minute.
We're going to fix that technical problem.
This is Democracy Now!, democracynow.org, the War and Peace Report, that music media wars. Our guest today is David Barstow, investigative reporter at the New York Times, won the 2009 Pulitzer Prize for his articles Message Machine. Behind TV analysts, Pentagon's hidden hand, and one man's military-industrial complex. How did Glenn Greenwald put it on his blog? The Pulitzer-winning investigation that dare not be uttered on TV. Well, today we break that sound barrier. As Glenn Greenwald put it, the New York Times, David Barstow won a richly deserved Pulitzer Prize for two articles that, despite being featured as major news stories on the front page of the New York Times, were completely suppressed by virtually every network and cable news show, which to this day have never informed their viewers about what Barstow uncovered. And yet here